The stage from Colton set her down on Main Street with one trunk and 62 cents, and Clara Whitfield stood in the September dust of Harmon Creek, Wyoming, and did the thing she had become very good at in the past 2 months. She took stock of what she had. She accepted what she didn't. She figured out what to do next. The problem was that what to do next had run out. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. She had come here from Abilene, where her husband Daniel had died in the spring owing money to 4 creditors, and where the creditors had come for the furniture before the funeral was over, and she had left with the dress on her back and the name of a woman in Wyoming who might know of work. The woman had moved on in April. Clara had been 3 weeks in Harmon Creek, trying every door she could find and being turned away from each one with the particular patience that small towns used when they had already decided about someone. Mrs. Alcott at the seamstress shop had smiled and said no and hired a girl named Betty Marsh the following day. The hotel laundry was fully staffed, according to a man who was posting a help-wanted notice in the window as Clara arrived to ask. The church women spoke to her with the warmth reserved for people they did not intend to see again. She sat on the bench outside Caldwell's General Store on a Tuesday morning and counted what she had left by feel, because she already knew the number and the knowing didn't require looking. 62 cents. 1 night at the boarding house. 1 meal at the diner. After that, nothing she could name. She was still sitting there when the wagon pulled up. A working ranch wagon, dusty and practical, with 2 strong horses and a man on the bench who climbed down the way ranchmen did, without ceremony, already thinking forward. He was past 35, broad-shouldered, with dark hair going gray at the temples and a face the weather had shaped into something angular and steady. He tied the horses without looking at her. Then he looked at her. Not the kind of looking she had grown used to in Harmon Creek. Not the measuring kind that calculated what problem she represented. Just the plain kind. A man noticing a thing that didn't fit its context, trying to understand why. She held his gaze. She had nothing left to lose by it. He went into the store. The bell above the door sounded, and then the low murmur of him speaking to Ed Caldwell inside. The September morning went on around her, boots on the boardwalk and a horse tied at the post across the street, and somewhere east the sound of a hammer, and Clara sat with her hands folded on her purse and thought with a clarity that surprised her that she was very, very tired. The door opened. He came out with flour under one arm and a coil of wire over his shoulder, and he stopped on the step and looked at her again. "You eaten today?" he said. She looked up at him. No pity in his face. No performance. Just the question. "No," she said, because lying about it served nothing. He looked at the diner across the street, then back at her. "Sit down and eat something," he said. Not quite an order. Not quite an invitation. Something in between, the way practical offers landed when a person had decided something was necessary and said it before measuring the arithmetic of saying it. She could have said no. She had said no to harder things. But she was hungry and 62 cents from nowhere, and the man standing in front of her had asked a plain question and received an honest answer, and the asking had cost him nothing he seemed to regret spending. "All right," she said. His name was Jonas Hale. She learned this at the diner on Main Street, over a plate of eggs and bread that tasted like the best thing she had eaten in weeks, because it probably was. He had a cattle ranch 7 miles north. A hired hand named Will who worked with bad knees. A son named Sam, 9 years old, who had been eating whatever Jonas could manage since the woman who had been cooking for them left for California in July. "Can you cook?" he said, when she had finished most of the plate. "Yes." "Seriously or politely?" "My husband had a cook before he lost most of what he had," she said. "After that, I was it. I fed 2 ranch hands and a hired girl on whatever I could put together, and nobody went hungry." He looked at her the way he had been looking at things since she met him, directly, without hurry, actually listening rather than waiting. $12 a month, he said. "Room and board. The room is small. The house needs work, but it's sound. You'd cook, keep the house, help with what comes up. I'm not looking for a servant. I need someone who can run a household while I run a ranch." "I'm not a servant," she said. "I want that clear between us." "I didn't say you were." She looked out the window. 3 women from the church steps passed on the boardwalk, and one glanced in and looked away with the particular efficiency of someone filing information for later use. "When do you need someone?" Clara said. "Last July," he said, and something crossed his face that might have been humor if it had stayed long enough to be certain. She settled her account at the boarding house that afternoon, picked up her trunk, and climbed onto the wagon seat beside Jonas Hale. He drove north without making conversation. She did not try to fill the quiet. She was beginning to understand that he was a man who did not waste things, including words. The ranch came into view after 7 miles of open country. Solid built, the kind of house that had been put up with intention and then left longer than it should have been to the elements. The porch railing on the south side had lost a board. The kitchen garden was a tangle of dead stalks gone to seed sometime in summer. The barn was in better repair than the house, which told her something about where this man put his priorities. Sam was on the porch steps, 9 years old, dark-haired, with eyes that moved over her with the frank assessment children used before they learned to disguise it. He looked at her, then at his father. "This is Mrs. Whitfield," Jonas said. "She's going to be cooking and keeping the house." Sam studied her for another moment. "Can you make biscuits?" he said. "Yes," Clara said. "Papa's biscuits are like rocks." "Sam," Jonas said. "They are," Sam said, with the flat certainty of someone stating a settled fact. He looked at Clara again and appeared to reach a decision. "Do you need help with your trunk?" "I'd appreciate that," she said. He came down the steps and took one end of it without being asked again, and they carried it inside together. The first evening was not easy. She was a stranger in a strange kitchen, learning the personality of an unfamiliar stove with a child watching from the doorway and a man in the barn who would not return until the light left the hills. She burned the onions and salvaged them. She made a stew from what the larder had, which was not much, and cornbread she got right on the first try, and she was grateful for that because she had the feeling Sam had been keeping score since she walked through the door. Jonas came in at dusk, washed his hands at the basin, and sat at the table and looked at what was in front of him with the expression of a man who had not had a real meal in some time and was trying not to show it. He ate several minutes in silence. Then, "This is good." "Thank you," she said. "Where'd you learn to cook like this?" "Necessity," she said. Sam had cleaned his plate. He was watching his father, waiting for something, and when Jonas said nothing else, Sam looked at Clara. "These biscuits," he said carefully, "aren't rocks." She kept her face very still. "I'll take that as high praise," she said. He went back to eating. Across the table, Jonas was watching his son with an expression that was private and full, the look of a man who had watched his child carry something too heavy for too long and felt the weight of it. He caught her looking and turned back to his plate. That was the first supper. There would be many more. She had been at the Hale Ranch 2 weeks when she began to understand the shape of what she had come into. The spare, careful way Jonas moved through his own house, as though still learning what he was allowed to want from it. The way Sam sometimes stood in the kitchen doorway watching her work without asking for anything. The way children stood when they were used to absence and weren't sure presence was a permanent thing. The photograph on the mantelpiece. A woman with light hair and a direct look, framed in plain dark wood. Jonas did not look at it when he passed. Sam sometimes stood before it for long moments when he thought no one was watching. Her name had been Martha. She had died 2 winters ago, something in her chest that moved fast. Jonas had buried her on the ridge above the north pasture, where she had liked to walk in the evenings. He had continued running the ranch and raising his son and saying very little about any of it, because that was, as far as Clara could determine, the only way he knew to live with things too large to talk about. She did not try to fill the space Martha had left. It was a specific shape that belonged to a specific person, and the kindest thing she could do was exist alongside it without making it smaller or pretending it wasn't there. What she could do was the work, and she was good at the work. By the end of the first week, the kitchen garden was cleared and the fall vegetables stored properly. By the end of the second, she had mended 3 shirts and repaired the porch railing and established a routine that meant Sam had a hot breakfast before school and supper waiting when he came home. Jonas said nothing about any of it directly, but he began coming in for supper without needing to be called, and he started leaving the work at the door in a way she had not seen from him the first few days, as though he was slowly remembering that the house and the ranch were different rooms, and it was permitted to treat them that way. She made Martha's apple cake once, not on purpose. She found the recipe in the kitchen drawer, written in a careful hand on a fold of paper, and made it because she had apples and the recipe was there. When she set it on the table, Sam went still. "That was Mama's cake," he said. "I didn't know. I found the recipe." I'm sorry. He looked at the cake, then at her. No, he said slowly. It's all right. She'd want it made. A pause. She always said recipes were for using. He ate 2 pieces. Jonas came in an hour later and saw the remains of it on the table. He stopped. He looked at the cake and then at Sam and then across the kitchen at Clara, and his face did something she hadn't seen from him yet. Something that came open briefly, like a door before someone decided whether to close it. He sat down. She cut him a piece without being asked. He ate it in silence, and when he set his fork down, he looked at the table for a long moment and then looked at her. Thank you, he said. She nodded and began clearing the plates. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The trouble from town arrived in October, not all at once, but in the slow accumulation of small pressures. She had expected it. Nellie Marsh, whose daughter Betty worked at Mrs. Alcott's, stopped Jonas on Main Street and expressed concern for his son in the particular way of women who had decided concern was the proper container for what they were actually feeling. She had heard things about Mrs. Whitfield's situation in Abilene, about the deaths and the manner of Daniel's dying, and whether a woman who had arrived with nothing was an entirely safe arrangement for a widower with a child. Jonas told Clara about it that evening with the flat economy of a man reporting a fact. What did you say to her? Clara asked. That I appreciated her concern and that my household was in order. He looked at her. Which it is. What she heard was that you were defensive, Clara said. He held her gaze. Probably. Does it worry you? She thought about it honestly. Not the talking, she said. The talking will either stop or it won't, and what I do about it is the same either way. Which is, keep doing the work, she said. That's the only argument that holds. Something in his face settled. All right, he said, and that was that. The second move came from a man named Arthur Greer, who had done business with Daniel Whitfield in Abilene through a trade associate and had not been repaid before Daniel died. He had gotten word Clara was in Wyoming and wrote a letter to the Harmon Creek Courier suggesting that the widow of a man of poor character was unfit company for the children of decent families. The letter appeared in print on a Friday. Sam brought the paper home from school on Monday and set it on the kitchen table without comment. Clara read it at the counter while supper was on, kept her face still, folded it, and put it in her apron pocket. Jonas read it that evening at the counter. His jaw tightened. When he finished, he set the paper down and looked at the wall. Greer had a business connection to Daniel, Clara said. She was cutting bread. My husband borrowed money through him and never paid it back. That's true. She paused. The rest is Greer's opinion of what that means, and his opinion isn't worth the paper it's printed in, but it's in the paper now regardless. Jonas turned. What do you want to do about it? She had thought about this. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that looks like defending myself against something I can't deny. Daniel was what he was, and I married him young and I stayed because I had made a promise, and when he died I left with what I had earned by keeping it, which wasn't much, but it was mine. She met his eyes. I'm not ashamed of any of that. He looked at her steadily. Then, I'm going to speak to Greer. Not on your behalf. On the question of printing accusations without evidence in a county paper. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, he said, and his voice had something in it that made the answer final. He went to Harmon Creek the next morning. Whatever he said, she never learned exactly, because Jonas was not a man who described his own arguments when the outcome was sufficient. The letter in the Courier was the last direct move from that quarter. When she came into Caldwell's store the following week, Ed Caldwell greeted her by name and carried the supplies to the wagon himself, which he had not done before. November deepened into December. She learned the ranch through the harder weeks, which pastures flooded, where the fences needed watching, the particular temperament of each animal. She learned that Jonas had built this house himself over 3 summers, that Martha had planted the apple trees along the south fence line and had lived to see them bear fruit twice, that Sam had not cried in front of his father since the funeral, and that Jonas worried about this in the steady, quiet way he worried about things he did not know how to address. Mrs. Alcott came into Caldwell's store in December while Clara was at the counter and said, without preamble, I understand you do fine mending work. I have a commission I can't complete before the end of the month. I'd pay you fairly for whatever portion you were willing to take. Clara looked at her. Why me? Mrs. Alcott had the grace to look briefly uncomfortable. Because you're the best seamstress in the county, and I should have hired you in September." She paused. "I let other people's opinions do my thinking for me." "Send the pieces to the ranch by Friday," Clara said. "I'll have them done in 2 weeks." That evening she told Jonas. He listened with his coffee. "The town's recalibrating," he said. "Some of it," she said. "Most of what matters," he said. And she understood he was saying something larger than the immediate thing, and she let it stand. Christmas came and she and Sam made gingerbread while snow fell outside the window. He told her his mother had always made it, but his father hadn't been able to find the recipe after she died. She listened without looking directly at him, because he was saying something careful and it needed to be received carefully. "She had good taste," Clara said. "Yes," Sam said. "She did." Jonas came in from the cold and found them at the kitchen table with flour on their hands, and he stopped in the doorway with his hat in his hand and did not come in for a moment. He looked at the kitchen, at Sam, at her, and something in his face went open in the way that had been becoming more familiar. "Gingerbread," Sam informed him. "I can see that," Jonas said quietly. He came inside and hung up his coat, and that was Christmas. The letter from Kansas arrived in January. A man named Robert Foster, who had been Daniel's creditor through Greer, had gotten word Clara was in Wyoming with a position and income. He wrote to inform her that the outstanding debt of her late husband, which he considered in part her responsibility as widow, was in the amount of $340, and that he intended to pursue the matter legally. She read the letter 3 times. $340 was more than 2 years of wages. She put it in her pocket, made breakfast, did the morning work, and waited until Sam was at school and Jonas was in the south pasture before she sat down at the kitchen table and looked at it again. She was not going to be run out by this. She had made her mind up somewhere around the time the ranch had stopped being a place she was surviving and started being a place she belonged to, in the way that belonging was made, not by being handed something, but by putting yourself into it daily until it held the shape of your presence. When Jonas came in at noon, she put the letter on the table in front of him. He read it without comment. $340, he said. "Yes." He folded it and looked at her. "Do you have an attorney in Abilene who handled the estate?" "A man named Pierce." "Write to Pierce. Get the accounting from when Daniel died. Creditors should have filed claims at probate. If Foster is coming to you now, it's because he didn't file then, or filed and was denied." He held her gaze. "A widow's debt liability in this territory is limited to her share of the marital estate. If that was assessed at probate and nothing was available, Foster has no legal claim on your earned wages." She looked at him. "You know estate law." "I know what it cost me to learn when Martha died," he said quietly. "There were people who thought her family had claims on the ranch. They didn't. I'll write to Pierce today. Let me know what he says." He held her gaze a moment. "Because it's your problem and you're here and I can help." Pierce wrote back in February. The estate had been assessed at probate in August. Clara had been listed as principal creditor for unpaid household expenses, and after the sale of Daniel's remaining assets, nothing had remained for distribution. Foster had filed a claim and been denied. The probate court had ruled that no further claims could be brought against the widow's person. She owed nothing. She wrote to Foster's attorney with Pierce's help. She heard nothing more from Kansas. March came and the snow began to soften, and the apple trees along the south fence put out their first tentative buds. Sam noticed them first. He came to get her from the kitchen specifically to show her the way children brought things to people they were certain would understand why they mattered. "Mama planted those," he said. "I know," she said. They stood at the fence together in comfortable silence and looked at the small, tight buds on the gray branches, the first green thing in the world after a long winter. Jonas found her that evening in the kitchen at the end of the day, the way he found her most often when things were settled between them, with the lamp turned low and the fire going and Sam already upstairs. He sat across the table and said, "I want to ask you something." "All right," she said. "When you came here," he said, "you needed work. I needed help. That's what this started as." "Yes." "It's not what it is now," he said. She held his gaze. "No," she said. "It isn't." He looked at the table for a moment in the way he looked when he was choosing words with the care they deserved. "I've been alone in this house for 2 years," he said. "Not just alone. Absent. Here and keeping things going, but not here the way a person should be here." He paused. "I don't know exactly when that changed. I know why it changed." She waited. "You made supper the first night," he said. "Sam made that comment about the biscuits, and you kept a straight face. And I thought, This woman is going to be all right. He paused. It wasn't one thing after that. It was every day, watching you put this house back together piece by piece without anyone asking you to. Watching Sam come back. She felt that land. I'm not asking you to fill a place that belonged to someone else, he said. Martha was Martha, and that's not something that gets replaced, and I wouldn't ask you to try. What I'm asking is whether you'd be willing to build something that's just ours. New, different, its own thing. She looked at this man who had said sit down and eat something to a woman on a bench with 62 cents and no good options, who had offered her work without asking her to be anything beyond capable, who had helped her with Foster's letter with the same quiet practicality he brought to barn work and fence repair because it needed doing and he was there, who had never once told her what she should be, who had simply made room for who she was and let the rest follow. Yes, she said. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his, large and rough and warm, steady in the way of a man who worked hard and meant what he did. She turned her hand under his and held it. Outside, the March wind was moving through the apple trees. Weeks of cold still ahead, the valley floor still mostly white, spring a promise rather than a fact. But the kitchen was warm. The lamp was burning. Upstairs, Sam was asleep with his boots outside his door the way he left them every night. And she had learned to read that as the particular, wordless kind of belonging that arrived not through declaration, but through the slow accumulation of ordinary days. She thought about the bench outside Caldwell's general store. 62 cents and nowhere left to go. A man climbing down from a wagon and asking a question with nothing performed in it. She had answered honestly. He had said sit down and eat something. She had. And the whole of what followed had grown from that one plain act of common decency. One meal, one question, one offer from a man who saw a person in need and did not make it complicated. Not without difficulty. Not without the town's opinions and Foster's letter and grief she was still careful around, and a child who had needed the slow kind of trust, and a man who had needed even longer to understand what he was building. But it had come, one day and one supper at a time. She had sat down and eaten something. And from that, everything. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.